Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my LCK week number 4 overview and analysis video in the spring split. The LCK is back. We had that week off for Lunar New Year, and they have returned. There was a lot of really great action. Of course, I certainly missed the LCK. I know a lot of people in the community also miss the LCK. It's not very often that we get weeks off in terms of the year for the LCK. A lot of times they'll either start after Lunar New Year, or they'll just kind of play through it. That's what they did last year, and so it's definitely been a little bit of a withdrawal to have it after week number 3. We got it at a really weird time, and it's going to be interesting to see how teams adapt and react to it. But of course, let me know down in the comment section below how you're feeling about the LCK. You can talk about any of the series, any of the games that happened in week 4 here, or you can just talk about the LCK in general. We'd just love to know you guys' thoughts on everything that's kind of going on in the LCK at the current moment. Of course, you can check out my thoughts and opinions on the first 3 weeks. Up in the iCard right now is going to be the LCK playlist that I have for Spring Split up until this point. But without further ado, let's jump right into the content. Don't want to waste too much of you guys' time at the beginning. If you are new here, what we're going to do is go series by series, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each individual series, and then at the end of the video, I'll be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to kind of tie everything into a nice, neat little bow, as well as updating my power rankings from number 1 to number 10 after 4 weeks of action. So, without further ado, let's jump right into day number 1. And we kick day 1 off. We come back from the Lunar New Year with a banger. One of the most interesting series we've had to date. It was KT Rolster taking on Gen.G. And KT Rolster is going to pick up the 2-0 series win. Kind of crazy to be able to say that. This is certainly not an outcome that we all expected. Gen.G obviously undefeated through their first 3 weeks, 6-0, 12-2 in terms of game score. They were even able to take down and quite frankly outplay T1 in their matchup against them, but for KT to come out and just kind of dominate in this series, yeah, this team's pretty legit in its current installation. I did not expect them to look like this. I thought there were going to be a lot more concerns when it came to some of the consistency of this team, and while they certainly haven't been perfect, they still have that 0-2 week in week number 2. This was great for them. Now, obviously, I could play into the meme, and I could say, the 2-0, 0-2 thing that I've been talking about. Some people would say, oh, they went 2-0, in odd number weeks, so you would think that they would be 0-2 in week number 4 because they, isolate and oscillate, I should say, between the two, 2-0 and 0-2 kind of thing, right? But you got to remember, we got the week off. They were lucky enough with the schedule to get their 0-2 week on an off week, so it's just a 2-0 week. That's the copium that I have here. Jokes aside, this was awesome. They played amazing, and these players are playing at a super high level right now. And it's not even just the ones that I expected to be playing well. I expected BDD to be really good. I expected Def to be very consistent for this team. Perfect was somebody who I really liked a lot coming out of the Challengers League, but Pyosik and Beryl have arguably been some of the more important players to their teams in the league, specifically Pyosik in the jungle, who is going to get my player of the series here. Is he like the MVP of the league at the current moment? The dude is absolutely popping off. Whatever, bone to pick he had with North America and Team Liquid, obviously he left under weird circumstances, saying some stuff about his teammates and yada, yada, yada. Comes back over here to the LCK, wants to reunite with some friends, some people he actually does want to play with. And look at him. I mean, he's playing better than he ever has in his entire career. I think that's very fair to say. We've never seen this version of Pyosik. This is the best he has ever looked, and that's pretty crazy for somebody who's won Worlds. The Lee Sin, the Viego, the carry-oriented picks that can take over in late-game teamfights, that's really where he excels. You can talk about how his early games are inconsistent, and that does lead to variance when it comes to, his output on games, which we've seen over the course of his career, but his team fighting variance is not there. He has always been very good in isolated 5v5s, and now he's got a mid laner who wants to play into that. He's never really had a mid laner who's been a more supportive player. I mean, maybe, Solka, or I guess Quad back in the day, right, on that early DRX team, but he's essentially only played with top-tier mid laners like Chovy and like Zeka, and, not that APA is a top-tier mid laner, but he wanted to play more, carry-oriented picks. He wanted more resources in the mid lane. Pyosik is finally on a team where he gets to play with a mid laner who's very willing to play Talia and move around the map and help him out a lot, or very willing to play Azir and sit back and not get as many resources, and he's really taking advantage of it. Great stuff from him. Like I said, kind of an MVP frontrunner right now, and Beryl was also very good here. Now, how much of that was him playing well and how much of that was him getting lucky? It's definitely, I think, like a 75-25 split, in the 75 being he's very good right now, and the 25 being still getting a bit lucky, but surviving in some of these fights on the Nautilus was incredible. He really is playing on the edge of danger at a lot of times. I can't agree with a lot of the decisions he's making making. He still seems to have this kind of devil-may-care attitude when it comes to trying to walk around the map and just getting caught out in random places that he had on DRX, but his teammates are better, and so he's able to get bailed out of it a bit more often, and that lets him play from a neutral station more often, which he's very good at. He's very good at being able to play as so long as he's not putting himself in really bad situations and giving the enemy team a ridiculous amount of gold, which he has been doing the past 2 years. It's nice to see that he can kind of get bailed out of those situations now, and then he can actually do the things that he does at a really high level. Deft continues to be great, was player of the week for me in week number 3, continues to look amazing, better than he has in quite a while. I mean, he was really good last year for DK as well, but I think he's been solid for KT. BDD, perfect, looking solid, perfect in particular, looking really nice on the Cassante. KT just clicking. This doesn't happen against Gen.G for, you know, a random reason. You have to be a pretty darn good team to look like this against a team that was undefeated, but for Gen.G, this is your first loss of the year, certainly not what you were looking for, and to get 2-0'd by KT, it's certainly not how you wanted to come back from Lunar Break. Like, this kind of was a bad series for you. Dead of the series for me is going to go to Canyon. This was a lot more indicative of what he was in 2023 rather than what he has been so far in 2024. I think some of his positives for this team have maybe been a little bit overstated. He was really good in week number 3, but the first couple of weeks, it definitely felt like he was still trying to find his footing, and you know, we saw Pioshik just out-jungle him in this game. I mean, there really was a bit of a canyon, or in this series, I should say. There really was a bit of a canyon, and Pioshik was on top, not always being able to generate, like, crazy early game leads, but the Lee Sin was definitely strong in game number 1, and the Viego was so much more useful than the Jarvan in game number 2. Canyon just couldn't keep up. There really wasn't a lot that he was doing. This was not a good series for him. It's something to monitor. He had series like this a lot last year for DK as well. You really hope that this doesn't become a pattern for him, because that's when it starts to become concerning. Lahens was also pretty bad. Like I said, Beryl just kind of gapping him on the other side. The Milio was always in a bad position, was stepping up a little bit too far, and the Lucian Milio just didn't end up working out. Worth noting, there is a ridiculous win rate for Senna going into Lucian right now in pro play. Maybe it's just the LCK, maybe it's pro play. They put a graphic up on the screen where it's like 5-0, 6-0, something like that. It's been ridiculous how successful Senna is into Lucian. Maybe I wouldn't consider prioritizing that matchup particularly high. Chovy wasn't nearly as active as BDD on the map, but a lot of that had to do with the fact that his jungle lost a lot of pressure, and Keem was not nearly as good as perfect. This just kind of was the first series where Gen.G felt a bit outclassed. A lot of it coming from early advantages and just pressure that KT was able to put on by just keeping their foot on the gas, but Gen.G has to be able to rebound. I'm not freaking out about them just yet, because this still is, you know, one of the best teams in the world, and you're allowed to lose a series. Nobody thought they were going to go undefeated, or at least nobody expected them to go undefeated. I think you just kind of hope that maybe they would have lost a little bit more gracefully, because this definitely felt like a loss that shouldn't have happened. They should have at least won one game, or they should have at least made one of these games close. Neither happened. KT was the better team, and that's a big credit to KT. Congratulations to them. They looked great here. Pioshik is on MVP pace. Deft is looking amazing. There are a lot of positives to KT Rolster, and, you know, there's really not a lot saying that this team's upside can't be one of the best teams in the entire world. And then moving on to our second game of day number 1 here, and not a particularly shocking upset here as DRX takes on the Kwangdong Freecs, and KDF is able to pick up yet another win. They move above 500 for the first time in a while in the LCK here, to 4-3 in terms of series score, to 8-7 in terms of game score, and man, does this team genuinely feel almost entirely fixed now that they've changed their AD carry position. I don't even think it's just AD carry that is now winning, but, you know, this feels like a very complete team in their current iteration, and it's really, really fun to watch. For DRX on the other side, this is not a very good team. Their macro is maybe the worst in the entire league, including Bro, who's also just miserable. I don't know, somehow DRX knows even less to do in the mid game. I mean, this team just AFK groups in the mid lane, like they just ARAM it at 20 minutes every game, and it's ridiculous. Their macro is horrendous, and KDF definitely took advantage of that, but, you know, DRX has had a lot of time to fix these problems, and they just haven't. This is not a very good team right now, but we'll talk about KDF first player of the series. I mean, come on, dude. It's Dudu in the top lane. Oh my goodness. This was a return to form for a man that I really had been talking about as one of the breakout stars of last year, even if his team didn't necessarily live up to it. Like, he was great in 2022. I want to make that case clear. Like, I was already pushing for him in 2022. I thought he was a really good player. He comes over here to KDF, and he dominates. Like, he was awesome last year, consistently winning games for this team. Basically, every series they won was on the back of how good the solo lanes were, mostly top lane. He started off a bit slower. Everybody kind of started off a bit slower for KDF in 2024, but as soon as Bull came in and started winning in the bot lane, isolated in 2v2s, like, the rest of this team felt completely unlocked, and Dudu destroyed this series, both the Aatrox and the K'Sante. The Karma did not work for DRX. I don't know why they went back to it in game number 2 after it got massacred so hard in game number 1, but to each their own, I guess, decision-wise. Dudu definitely took advantage of it, and he dominated here. Really good to see that. Cuz has also been amazing ever since Bull came in. I don't know if it's just because he feels a bit more unlocked, like he doesn't have to babysit bot lane nearly as much. That could definitely be it, but the last week and a half, essentially, of Cuz has been really, really, really good. The 2 Lee Sin games here, very solid. Yes, he's going into Sponge, who has been one of the worst players in the LCK so far this split, but, you know, he's earned a lot of the positives that he's been getting the last week and a half. Bulldog looks great. Even if Satab did, like, keep up a bit and be one of the better pieces on DRX in this series, Bulldog was way better and was way more relevant, especially on the Hwei. In game number 1, Bull on the Senna. Again, Senna's dominating this Lucian matchup. I think we're at like 8-9-0 Senna into Lucian in the LCK, something ridiculous like that. I really don't think you should be opting into that matchup if your team's at the current moment. Clearly, it's just not working out. Scaling is better in the LCK. Who would have thought? But Ondo looks good. Bull looks good. Everybody on KDF looks good. This is a top 5 team in the league right now, and honestly, they might even be higher than that if some teams end up really underperforming. I obviously can't say that right now because they're just coming off of a pretty big losing streak, and it's not like DRX is the best team in the world, but this is a nice win. And then for DRX, you know, you're bad, so you're not freaking out too much about this loss, but, you know, you are concerned that the 2 players that are kind of the worst in this series, the 2 players that I think were the least valuable, were your 2 veterans, Rascal and Teddy, who I think both played really bad here. It was almost a toss-up on who to give dud of the series to. It really wasn't, though. Rascal's going to get it, and I know Rascal has a lot of defenders. He had a lot of defenders last year when I was talking about how not good he was for DRX, about how people were saying he was elo held on this team that was really struggling, just kind of forgetting the fact that Rascal was really bad in the top lane, was one of the worst top laners in terms of lane stats and translating any sort of lead that he would get into any sort of pressure on the map. You look at that this year where, you know, even when Satab is having decent games, Pliata is actually playing really well. He's easily the best player on this team. Rascal has been one of the worst players in the LCK, full stop. Like, it's not just one of the worst players on this team. He's been a bottom 5 player in the LCK, and it's very apparent. Do not put him on Karma. I don't know what you're doing. Like, and I get it. Game 1, like, maybe things work out. Like, I like Karma top. I think it offers you something unique, but Rascal was so miserable on it in game 1. I can't believe you ran it back in game number 2. He was awful, but Teddy was also awful in this series, not taking advantage of any of Lucian's, like, major selling points. And I hate this pick for Teddy. Like, it's the opposite of what he does as a player. When you think of Teddy, you think of somebody who is going to kind of let the game come to him. He's not really going to push his advantages. He's not really going to take any sort of major risks. You know, if his team is in a neutral state, he's talented enough to be able to win team fights and do his job at a high level, but he's really never going to do more than that. He's never going to be this high priority, like almost assassin-esque player that you need Lucian to be in this matchup, and clearly it didn't work out. He makes this champion look incredibly weak, and, you know, I think Lucian's in a strong state, but clearly you cannot be picking it into Senna, and you also can't be picking it on a player and on a team that is very inactive in the early game. It's just not going to work out. Mid-game pressure is what Lucian really needs. He needs to be able to hit that 1-item breakpoint and start fighting in these 3v3 skirmishes, and this team just doesn't want to do that, so I really don't get the pick. Either way, like I said, Pliata and Satab weren't horrible. Sponge has been not good. This wasn't a huge departure from that. DRX is just not good. This is not a very good team at the current moment, and you know, they would be number 10 in most years of the power rankings, but the bottom of the LCK is generally awful right now. Like, it is very clear that there are like 5 or 6 good teams in the LCK, and then the bottom 4 are like, they would be middle to bottom tier teams in NA at the current moment. Like, they're just not very good. The parity of the league is super high in terms of like top versus bottom, and DRX is definitely one of the bottom teams. Somehow they're not the worst in the league, and it's shocking after this performance. But for KDF, they look great. They're really on fire right now, a team that really struggled in the first couple of weeks, has figured out how they want to play, has figured out how they want to attack some weaknesses from enemy teams, and their individual outplays are very much coming through. If they play like this for the rest of the year, again, who's to say this can't be a Worlds team? And then moving on to day number 2 here in LCK week number 4. Day 2 was definitely a fun one, and we kicked it off with a matchup between T1 and Dplus KIA. A pretty historic matchup here in the LCK that hasn't been quite as interesting as of late, and that was definitely the case here with T1 being able to take this series 2-0. Game 2 was definitely at least a little bit better, but man, DK is just not playing at a particularly good level at the moment. It is very clear that they are below the upper echelon of teams in the LCK. They are not on the same level as even teams teams like Hanwha Life or KT Rolster or maybe even the Kwangdong Freecs, like, it's very disappointing to see this maybe even be like the worst playoff team, considering their roster is better than that. They absolutely shouldn't be that, but credit to T1 for this win. They've bounced back so well ever since that early season loss to Gen.G. They've not really looked all that pressed ever since then. They only have one game loss since then. They're 12-1 ever since their 2 losses to Gen.G. Not bad in terms of game score, but it's everybody kind of clicking at the right time. Zeus is obviously the one who I think has stood out the most, maybe Faker as well, but to me, player of the series in this one is going to go to KIA. That Ashe game in game number 1 was genuinely terrific, was the best game that anybody played in this series. A lot of people are going to talk about split push Orianna in game number 2 for Faker, just taking towers left and right, constantly being able to survive because Zhonya's is really strong and he's obviously just great at the game. But I thought KIA's impact in game number 1 was a little bit more dominant, and really the bot gap in general was something that I really wanted to celebrate in this series for T1. KIA getting back on the right page is really, really big. We're going to talk about him a bit more as the week goes on, do not worry, but the Ashe game in game number 1 really indicative of how this team likes to play. I mean, Ashe obviously is pretty standard as a support now, but KIA was one of the big proponents for that at the beginning of its lifespan in the LCK at the support position, and he still pilots it arguably better than anybody else. I still love him on Tahm Kench as well. Just a very proactive and innovative support player, always willing to be aggressive and really has the mechanics to pull it off. He's the most mechanically intensive support player in the world, and he continuously shows that over and over and over again every time he's given the opportunity. Faker was obviously amazing, like I said. In game 2, he basically played split push Orianna and took like every single tower in the game, was constantly pulling pressure over from DK, and they could never actually do anything against him. He went deathless in that second game. Awesome stuff from him. I think if you wanted to give him player of the series, you absolutely could. I just like KIA's game 1 a bit more, but Faker was hilarious in game number 2, and so definitely deserves a shout out there. Guma Yushi looks awesome right now. Bot lane in general looks really strong. Owners looked solid. You know, he's not really impressing me in terms of his individual play, but in terms of being the facilitator, the Poppy, the Rel, the tank engager, that's something he wasn't really all that enthused about doing in previous years, so to see that be kind of the primary focal point for what he wants to do at the beginning of 2024 is definitely a positive for me, and Zeus, like I said, has been amazing. It's really him and Pioshik that are leading the MVP race at the beginning part of the year for me, so T1 looking awesome. They just continue to look dominant, and honestly, they might be the best team in the league, especially after that Gen.G loss on day number 1. But for DK on the other side, like I said, this team is just kind of in disarray. At the moment, really the only player that I'm not like freaking out about is Showmaker. That's because he's at least still trying to make plays, and generally he's been good in a lot of the series that they've had, but everybody else is a bit concerning in terms of the consistency that they have at the highest level. Aiming and Kellen were really bad in this series. Give dud of the series to either. Whether you want to give it to Aiming for consistently being way too far forward and getting caught out over and over again by, you know, even just like Varus arrows, like it's just really bad. Rel engages were consistently hitting him. Tahm Kench made his life a living hell in game number 2. The Azir shuffles hitting him in game number 1. Like Aiming really played bad in terms of his positioning, but Kellen was also not very good. It's really weird because both of them were very good at the beginning of this split. Like you go back to week 1 when this team was actually looking relatively competent. Aiming was looking great and Kellen was looking good alongside him. You know, I'm a Kellen defender. I think a lot of the hate that gets translated to Kellen is more so kind of a general DK problem than a Kellen problem, but the bot lane's really not working right now. The Pyke was definitely not the pick in game number 1, and it got punished. Lucid has been kind of overmatched, I think, at a lot of different levels. This was one of his better series in like the last week or so. And that's not a great thing to say, but he didn't get absolutely obliterated. And then you have Kingin in the top lane, who just is nothing. Like, he has reverted back to what he was before DRX, or before, I should say, 2022 DRX. This is like 2021, 2020 Kingin all over again. Billy Gaming Kingin all over again, where he's just like on weak side, not really doing a whole ton. He's able to pick up some gold because he's really not an awful team fighter, but he's never really like making a difference in the game. And that's really not the version of him that we got in 2022. And he was still kind of better than that last year, I would say as well. It's just things are not working for DK. As much as I like Showmaker and as much as I defend Kellen, you know, there are just enough pieces here that aren't picking up the work right now that it's genuinely becoming a problem for them to be able to win games easily. And so, you know, for me, I don't really know where DK sits. They feel like the worst playoff team at the current moment. Like I said, it feels like top 6 are better than the bottom 4, you know, and I would agree that DK is still in the top 6, but they do feel like the worst of the top 6 right now. And then for T1, I don't know. Are they the best team in the league? Maybe. They lost to Gen.G, but Gen.G just got clobbered by KT Rolster, so who really knows? T1 looks very good right now. That's all I can really say. All of their players are clicking, and who's really surprised about that? This is basically just a continuation of everything they were showing last year. And then moving on to our second series of day number 2 here, and the top team, bottom team matchup that really wasn't all that much of an upset, I guess you could say. Hanwha Life Esports taking on OK BRION. Hanwha Life destroys them. This was not a close series. They were the better team by a gigantic margin. They played really well in both games and really dominated in all 5 positions. There really isn't a ton of analysis that I can give you here. The LCK has been pretty stock standard in terms of these top versus bottom matchups all year up until this point, even though typically speaking, that's not how it ends up going. You're going to get some weird outcomes every once in a while. It really has not been the case. Again, like I said, top 6 versus bottom 4 feels basically unlosable for the top 6 at the current moment. But let's go ahead and talk about that top 6 team in Hanwha Life Esports. Player of the series, pretty obviously, is going to go to Zeka, this time for the Akali. Once again, Zeka overperforming what people talk about him as. People talk about him as somebody who is never going to be an elite mid laner. And I get it. It's bro. Like, he's going against Karis. It's not like he's facing the hardest mid laner in the world here, but Zeka's been very good for this team in both of the years that he's played for them. And, I talk about this a lot. For some reason, the LCK, fandom on social media just doesn't like Zeka. I get it. His Corki sometimes is a little bit not great, but he's still pretty good on Corki for the most part. He just has weird moments that other players don't have, like he's not as comfortable with the pick. But yes, I understand. Zeka has a small champion pool. He's really good at melee assassins, right? He's good at Akali. He's really good at Sylas. He's really good at Yone. Like, I get it. He's got a small champion pool. Well, I guess other than maybe like Azir, or maybe other than like LeBlanc, or maybe other than like the Nico that he was really good at last year, or maybe other than like Tristana, which he has like a great win percentage in KDA on, or maybe other than like Kassadin. Oh, wait, I just named like 8 champions that he's better than almost everybody in the world at. Yeah, this guy's small champion pool, like, I get it. He has a style that he likes to play, but it's just this mentality that I really get frustrated with, where it's like, guy has only 8 or 9 great champions. That must mean small champion. Guy is best at one champion and is still really good at others. That means that one champion is the only one he is good at. It's just a very weird conversation to have, I think. Zeka's just not nearly as bannable as people make him out to be. I think that he is a really talented mid laner who, yes, has a style and, likes to play a certain way, but basically every mid laner has a style and likes to play a certain way. We don't get on BDD for wanting to play Azir every game, even because he's really good at Azir and he likes to play that style and it works out for him. I don't really get it. Zeka's really good and he can play a bunch of different styles and champions, and, just because he prefers one doesn't mean he can't do the others. That's my rant. But yeah, the Akali was awesome. His best champion looked great. They probably shouldn't give that to him. They gave it to him and he dominated. That's Zeka, but he can dominate on other things too. He's been quietly very good this year. Viper and Delight continue to look awesome as a duo. Didn't really have to do anything. Got 2 games of Senna, and that means basically insta-win in the LCK at the moment. Peanut was awesome. I mean, the pressure that he was able to put on in game 1 on the Sejuani, just everywhere on the map, was awesome to watch. Gideon just had no chance of being able to keep up with that. Doran was pretty good on the top side. HLE's just a good team. They're just a really solid team that's going to be hard to beat. I really like how they've been playing recently, and they're 6-1 for a reason. Maybe they're not elite like the top 2 teams, or maybe even like KT Rolster, who knows, but they're a pretty damn good team, and I'm excited to see what happens when they really start getting tested a bit more. But for Bro on the other side, this is a really bad team, 0-7 start, and they absolutely deserve it. They're 1-14. I got called out in the offseason. Again, I'm going to bring this up in a lot of videos just to kind of give you an idea of why I wanted to say the things that I did in the offseason. I got a bunch of comments on my offseason grades video where people saying I was being too harsh on Bro, that I should cut them some slack, that they're not a big team, that they, aren't going to be able to spend money, that, they're always never going to be all that legit. I have to just not be so harsh and say that it's the worst offseason I've ever seen. But man, like, I truly think you could have done almost anything other than what you did, and it would have been a better offseason. If you had just promoted all of your challengers team, it's not even a good challengers team, but if you had at least just promoted all of them, I honestly would have felt better about it, because Karis is not good, the bot lane had to be replaced, and their challenger bot lane, who's just been whatever for a little while, is better. Like, they are definitely an upgrade. Samver in particular is infinitely better than what Envy was offering on this team. It's just everything they did this offseason was wrong, other than, I guess, keeping Morgan, and I guess Gideon's been okay, but he's honestly gotten worse over the past few weeks, ever since he got benched in that one series for no reason, for Void. It's just been very weird. Bro has kind of just decided to be 0-7 and, 1-14 this year, and it is their fault. It is the organization's fault for doing this. They should have known this was going to happen when they put out the team that they did at the beginning of the year. But dud of the series is going to go to Polu. Not very good. Just, I like him as a player. player, and Samver was awesome in this series. He showed a lot of really good traits, especially on the Varus in game number 2 when he finally got on a champion that does seem to work here in the LCK. But man, when you're Nautilus and you've got a fed Varus, you got to peel for him. Like, that's your job, is to keep him alive, is to actually try and make things easier on him. And he was just kind of abandoning his ADC in a lot of these fights. It was very frustrating. It felt very much like a rookie mistake coming in from a very young player, and I get it, like, he's inexperienced at this level, but he's got to be better than that. Karis got destroyed in the mid lane, especially on the Orianna in game number 2, but that is nothing new. He's been getting destroyed by everybody in the LCK this year, and he got destroyed by everybody in the LCK last year as well. Gideon was not good. Peanut was significantly better, got completely out-jungled in both game 1 and game 2, but specifically in game 1, when you're going to play Lee Sin, losing pressure that much early is bad, and Morgan is just kind of there. I think he's fine. Again, I don't think he's the problem on this team, and Samver looked really good in the AD carry role, but this team just doesn't have enough firepower to actually be able to compete with anybody who has any relative skill. They're just not a very good team. They don't know how to execute on very simple concepts, and they're really not all that coordinated. There's not anything going for Bro right now. This is an 0-7, 1-14 team for a reason. I would be surprised if they won more than 1 or 2 series all year. And then for HLE on the other side, you know, good for them. Like, you beat Bro. I do want to see you get more consistent. Peanut and Zeka looked awesome. And again, like I said, Zeka is somebody who I think is incredibly underrated by the community. But, you know, there are still question marks about whether or not they can compete with the best teams in the league. That's going to be answered a bit more later on in the week with a tougher series, because they really haven't been challenged all that much at the beginning of this year. But at least with the small tests, they've been able to pass them. But now moving on to the middle day here in the LCK, day number 3, and we kick day 3 off with a matchup between Nongshim RedForce and KT Rolster that KT actually was able to take care of business on. I know after their big win against Gen.G, there were a ton of KT fans that were like, well, we play Gen.G and Nongshim in the same week, we're going to beat Gen.G and we're going to lose to Nongshim, because that's what KT Rolster does. But no, here we are with a 4-0 week for KT Rolster. Let's not forget that because of the break, this was a 2-0 week, so I'm of course going to pander and pedal to that argument as much as possible. But again, jokes aside, KT is really in the zone right now. Everybody on this team is working. There are concerns about longevity in terms of whether or not the way that they're playing right now is going to be able to be consistent over the course of an entire split or in big series against good teams that will have more time to prepare and, you know, ban out things that might be a little bit strong for KT at the moment, like the Ashe. Like, do I think that that could be a problem? Maybe, like in the best of 5, but at least right now, it's all really clicking. Pioshik picked Rammus in game number 2, for crying out loud. Pretty insane. That's the first time that that champion has been picked in a decade in the LCK. 2014, I think it was. I think it was Pumandu who picked it. Might have been Pumandu. It might have been whoever's playing for MVP Ozone. I don't remember. I was watching, but golly, it's been a long time. There's been a lot of league. I can't remember the last time I saw Rammus jungle in pro play. It's actually ridiculous, and Pioshik pulled it off. But let's talk about it. The games in general, not just the crazy picks. Player of the series for me is going to go to Deft. Awesome series coming in from Deft. The Caitlyn in particular in game 2, who was shocked. The guy's got a skin on it in the game. He's pretty darn good at Caitlyn, and he continues to show that off every single time he gets it. Honestly, Deft and Beryl reminded me so much of Gumayushi and Keria in that game number 2 in terms of how they were able to play the early laning phase, and specifically like the spring 2023 version of that bot lane where it felt like Keria was like the best player in the world, and Guma was this really underrated, very good AD carry. I think Deft took a lot of the spotlight because he was able to deal a ridiculous amount of damage on the Caitlyn and just stay relevant throughout the entire game, but Beryl continues to look great on these more aggressive picks. He pulled out Zyra in game number 1. That's a champion we're really not seeing at all in pro play, and that we really haven't seen in pro play in quite a long time. You've got the Ashe, of course, which is just generally a very strong support in the current meta, but it's really nice to see these two get back together and get the synergy back. I was very concerned about it because honestly, I didn't love how they played as a duo the first time. They got better at Worlds, and Deft in particular really started to step it up down the stretch for DRX, was very consistent. But, you know, Beryl really struggled in terms of being able to play off of Deft's like more passive lane style. It's just really nice to see that the improvements that Deft made towards his laning last year on DK actually translate here to KT and make him work with Beryl at an incredibly high level. So good stuff to them. Pioshik obviously is great. The guy played Rammus and dominated in a pro game. I get it's against Sylvie, who, while he has taken strides up this year, is still not a star jungler by any means, but, you know, Pioshik looks awesome. I mean, truly in MVP form. Perfect was also, like, amazing in this game. Like, game number 2 was awesome from him, and I get it. Like, there's a conversation to be had that, okay, you put him on K'Sante and he's good, and you take him off K'Sante and he doesn't look as good, similar to a player that I complain about in the LEC a lot in Oscar Renin, but I think Perfect has a little bit more than that, and the reason I trust him a bit more is because, at least at the Challengers League level, he was so adept at playing other things. Like, he was very versatile in the champions that he could pull out and the champions that he could be useful on, that I really don't worry too much that he's going to be able to pick those things up. I just think right now, with the way that the rest of this team plays, with the fact that Pyosik wants to be more of a playmaker from the jungle position, that Deft and Beryl are taking such an aggressive 2v2 role in the bot lane, having something like K'Sante that can be a strong weak side on the top side of this map for KT has really been a positive. Perfect's really good at tanks. I think that's something that's going to continue to be prevalent, but Perfect was awesome. I honestly almost gave him player of the series. He was that good. BDD looked great, specifically on the Azir in game number 1, where those engages looked really good. You know, the playmaking ability of BDD is amazing, and KT's just a really good team. I mean, top to bottom, there's really not a weakness right now. Perfect looked a little bit shaky at the beginning of the year, and obviously we know Pyosik and Beryl are just going to have some games every so often that aren't going to be very good, but right now, they are playing well, and that means that KT is essentially unstoppable. 14-6 at the start of the year. This looks like a top 3 at worst team in the LCK, and then for Nongshim on the other side, they're just not good enough. Like, again, they're in the bottom 4. I like the upside of Nongshim. I honestly have been pretty complimentary to them over the course of this split, and maybe it's undeserved. They're on a 6-series losing streak now. They won the first series of the year in the LCK against DRX, and just have not been able to pick up another win since then. And, you know, a lot of their players have really struggled. Dud of the series is pretty obviously going to go to Din. Perfect was awesome on the K'Sante in both of these games, and Din got mega gapped. I mean, 0-8-0. Like, not a single kill involvement in the entirety of this series is a disaster, but he was losing in lane, too. Don't worry, it wasn't just the lack of impact in team fights. He was also losing isolated in the 1v1 on the Aatrox. Just not a good series from Din. He has reverted a lot to the negative tendencies we saw towards the end of 2023 that made me question whether or not he could be an LCK top laner. Call Me has also just completely fallen off a cliff. Like, as much as I loved his Challengers League tape, like, the only thing to say at this point is that he is maybe the worst mid laner in the LCK, and there's tough competition for that. I mean, Satab has not been great. Karis has been really bad. Like, there is certainly competition for worst mid, and Call Me might be leading that in terms of starting mid laners right now. It's just been a disaster. I still think Jiwoo and Peter are relatively interesting, specifically Jiwoo, but Peter is a good player, and Sylvie is ironically playing better this year than he played last year, but he was a miserable jungler last year, and now he's just kind of there. He's just not single-handedly losing games, kind of like he was for Nongshim for a lot of 2023. This team isn't particularly good. I do think they're going to be able to scrape by wins against bad teams. I would expect them to be better than teams like DRX and teams like BRION, you know, things like that, but, you know, they're not as good as any of the teams in the top 7, really. Like, even top 7 is probably too rich for them at the current moment. Their solo laners are just simply too bad, even if their bot lane is relatively interesting. But for KT Rolster on the other side, really great week number 4, another 2-0 week. They're sitting at 6-2 in terms of record. Hopefully they can keep this up. Really happy with how they've played so far. I've gushed about a couple of these players, but, you know, there is that fear that they could potentially crash back down to earth, that some of these players like Pyosik and like Beryl have never really had one split where they've just been good all the way through. There are always peaks and valleys for them. This could be the time for them to actually have that consistent split that they're able to dominate in from start to finish, and honestly, so far, that's really all they've shown. And then moving on to our second series of day number 3, the middle day here, a good one between the Kwangdong Freecs and FearX. The KDF is going to be able to take 2-1. They're going to have a 2-0 week. They're going to move to 5-3 on the start of the split, and that's pretty darn good considering how they started this split, where things were just kind of a disaster, basically across the board. They were 0-2 after the first week. Taiyun looked like the worst player in the LCK. He ends up getting replaced by Bull. Bull goes on that crazy spree in week number 2, looks great. You know, they're obviously able to carry that momentum. Now they're 5-3. They're in a really decent spot, sitting above 500 in a landscape where it's really important to just be a part of the upper echelon teams. You don't really need to dominate super early on into the split. You just need to make sure that you're in the top 6, and KDF has done that very comfortably. Right now, they are very clearly a top 6 team, and it's very fun. For FearX, they certainly are the best of the rest. They were able to take a game off of KDF, which is certainly not awful, but this really is the definition of like the mid team, like in the LCK this year, where there always feels like one team that separates the good teams from the bad teams. I feel like you've got your top 6, and then you've got your bottom 3, and then FearX just kind of sitting at 7th place, just being like, yeah, well, we're better than the worst, and we are clearly worse than the best, so that's just where we're gonna be. But for KDF, also worth noting, they made a substitution in this series. Quantum, their Academy support, actually came in, not their Challenger support, their Academy support. That's an important distinction to make. Academy is basically tier 3 over in, Korea and in the LCK, and so pretty big decision for them to make here. Quantum was actually very interesting to watch. Really liked him on the Renata in particular in game number 1, where I thought that there was a lot of good stuff, but he played the Nami well. In game number 3, the Pyke was definitely an interesting pullout, especially against Execute, who is a big Pyke player. Very fun to see that, but a very strange decision. I think Onbill's actually been really good for KDF in the support role at the start of this year, or at least ever since Bull came in and started playing AD carry, and so it is curious to me to sub him out when you clearly wanted to invest in him from last year, and then specifically not even for someone that Bull already has chemistry with. These two have never played in the bot lane together. It's specifically for Quantum, who is your basically tier 3 support. It's just a weird decision, but it ended up working out in this series. Outside of that, topside was amazing, as per usual. Player of the series is going to go to Cuz for me in the jungle. He's just so good at Lee Sin. It is really fun to watch. People who pass through KT Rolster tend to be very good at Lee Sin. It just kind of is what it is, whether you're a jungler or whether you're a top laner. In Rascal's case, it's always funny that champion and that org have kind of been connected. Score, even someone like Pioshik now. Obviously, Cuz last year as well. You gotta be good at Lee Sin to be on KT Rolster, but I digress. Cuz is looking really good. The past couple of weeks have been really positive for him. He really was looking like he was struggling a bit, I would say, in the middle or at the beginning of this split, where it just didn't feel like things were clicking, but having a losing bot lane will do that to you, especially when he had gotten so used to playing off of bot lane on KT Rolster and on SKT back in the day. He had really been kind of bot lane focused as a pather, and so he really had to change that around, and it worked here. Bulldog was really good as somebody he could feed a lot of resources into, specifically on the Hui in game number 3. Really, really good stuff there. The Azir in game 1 was awesome too. I really can't say enough good things about Bulldog, honestly. He's changed his style a lot. He's gone from a player that will kind of flip games, can be rather feast or famine because he really wants to try to make these flashy, big outplays. Of course, he was the second youngest player in the LCK last year. He's kind of grown already as an 18-year-old into somebody who you can rely on to just win lane a little bit more often, and it's really good. I think he's been better this year than he was towards the end of last year, and then Dudu was obviously very good down the stretch. Kasante is just a ridiculously broken champion. He was awful in game number 2. That was the worst game anyone played in this series, was his game 2 on the Garen. That was maybe the first and the last Garen that we are going to see in the LCK because, Lord, that was miserable to watch him try and play. I don't know if he's ever even attempted to play that before, but the Kasante definitely made up for it. He was really dominant in game number 3, and he would have been in contention for player of the series had he not had that miserable Garen game. But generally, I thought KDF played well, but specifically the top side. Cuz, Bulldog, Dudu, all continuing to look great. They were the reason I was so high on this team in the preseason. Glad to see that they're living up to that. But for Fox, really not a lot to say. They were just kind of there in this series. They looked good in game number 2. Closer had a good Azir game, and they were able to play off of Henna on the Jhin a little bit better. Willer had some control, and Kasante is just generally a ridiculously strong champion. But games 1, 3, they were both kind of blowouts. I know game 3 went 42 minutes, but it never really felt all that close. It just more so felt like, Lee Sin fell off a little bit, and we don't have the damage on Lucian to be able to close out these fights. We need Kasante and Hui to kind of pop off, and that's pretty much what happened, but for Fox, dud of the series for me is going to go to Clear in the top lane. Like I said, Dudu played really bad in game number 2, and he still won lane into Kasante, which is pretty bad, and then obviously he got run over. Clear got run over in 1 and 3. There have been a couple top laners that have really disappointed me. Rascal's definitely been on that list, but Clear is also somebody that I want to point out that's really just not had a very good split. He has been the worst player on this team. I think Execute has also kind of been in that conversation. You would have just expected a bit more from him because he was so good in the LEC, and he's really just kind of been a guy here. He gets to play with Hedda, who's just whatever, but, Closer, I think, has had some good moments. Willer, I think, has had some good moments, but the top and the bot lane really just aren't working for FearX. Again, I'm not freaking out about it. They're still significantly better than any of the bottom 3 teams in terms of the output they put out as a full unit. I just maybe would have hoped to see more from a team that I actually really like the makeup of in the offseason, but for Fox, they moved to 3 and 4. Not particularly surprising. This team's schedule is brutal in the next coming weeks. I imagine they're going to drop to like 3 and 8, and everyone's going to freak out, and then they'll go back to playing playing bottom 3 teams, and they'll beat them, and it's going to be clear that they're in 7th place. I imagine that's going to be the arc we have with Fox, but for KDF at 5-3 to end week number 4, that's a really nice place to be. Everybody's clicking. I don't know what you're going to do with support moving forward. That's probably the biggest question mark I have, whether that's going to be Quantum, whether that's going to be Ondil. I don't really know. I think it should be Ondil. I think he's earned that spot over the course of this split, but Quantum was pretty interesting in this series, and so we're going to have to check out and see what they end up doing, but at least for now, it basically doesn't matter with how good Topside is playing. And then moving on to day number 4 here, the second half of the week kicks off here, and it's a 6-in-1 battle between Gen.G and Hanwha Life Esports that Gen.G is going to pick up the win in. They obviously really needed this. They could not afford to go 0-2 in week number 4 coming back from the break. That would have been a pretty big disaster for them considering where they had left off, obviously undefeated, but nope, it's just a 1-1. They just take the loss to KT and they're able to bounce back with a really clean series win over HLE, where they were definitely better. They were able to gap certain lanes incredibly hard. A couple of their players really stepped up, but it's the ones that you would expect. It's the best players in the world that ended up performing like the best players in the world. Obviously, this game was pretty highly watched and prioritized because of some of the roster movements. Doran, Peanut, Delight, all playing for Gen.G last year, playing with Chovy and Pays, and so certainly some storylines on the line, but I'm gonna be honest, this is going to be the series that is my token rant of the week. So if you don't like my rants, I don't know who does or doesn't like my rants. It's interesting. Let me know what you think of them down in the comment section below. That I kind of say, I have at least one of these per week where I just talk about Reddit. And I'm just like, why does Reddit think like this? It feels like something that I can add that's productive to the conversation, because it really does feel like a lot of conversation surrounding the LCK and the LPL, because they play at such weird times for specifically us here in the United States, are just centered around, you know, he said, she said arguments, right? It's a lot of people on Reddit have said that this player is bad, so I believe that this player is bad, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of why I like to bring them up, because I do think there are actually a lot of people who take those opinions and just kind of formulate their own thoughts on the players because of it, and not necessarily from the gameplay. And so when I find something that I find to be inaccurate, I'm going to push back on it, and I'm going to say that in this one. Hanwha Life is not the team that everybody thinks it is. Viper played well in this series, but man, I can't agree with any ELO held comments. I think that that is an absurd thing to say, and it was literally every single response on the post-match thread, and so we'll get into that. We'll talk about Hanwha Life. Let's talk about Gen.G first. This is just a really good team. You know, we might have forgotten that because they lost to KT and because they didn't look good coming back from the lunar break. They haven't, you know, played a series where they won in a while, and so people might have forgotten how good Gen.G is, but they were a heavy contender for best team in the world to start this year in terms of how they were performing. Everybody was clicking. Everything was working, and while it didn't exactly happen against KT, this was a really nice bounce back. Player of the series pretty obviously is going to go to Chovy. Pretty amazing series coming in from him. He's just terrific. He's awesome, super fun to watch, and he continues to perform like one of the best players in the world, no matter what, you know, all of the Reddit analysts who say he's overrated will tell you. It's, oh, he hasn't won Worlds. Okay, well, he's won the LCK like 4 times. It's hard to do that, man. This guy's really, really good. Azir looked good in this series. Hwei looked really good in this series, and Canyon was also awesome. Chovy really dominated both of these games in terms of the damage, but Canyon really kind of controlled the macro, especially on Rel in game number 2. It is so hard to play games as Sejuani or as Lucian into a Rel that is this active on the map. You got to give a lot of credit to Canyon, who did get out jungled by Pioshik earlier in the week. It's nice to see him take that step back and be a little bit better in their second series here. Really like to see that. Keen was amazing on the top side, mega gapped Doran on the other side of this matchup. It's kind of always been how this has gone. It's always been a triangle of the top 3 top laners in the LCK, where Doran beats Zeus, Zeus beats Keen, and Keen beats Doran. It's kind of always been the triangle, or at least it has been going back the last 2 years, and that certainly didn't change here. Keen absolutely did beat Doran on the Rumble, on the Jax, on everything. He was just really good. Pays and Lehens were also solid. They didn't get a lot of pressure early, I guess. They didn't win lane, they didn't dominate lane, but they were a lot more active on the map, Lehens in particular, than Viper and Delight were, who just were sitting around doing nothing. Viper in particular for a lot of this series, and you got to commend them for that. You're not going to win lane every single game, but being useful even when you don't win lane is very impressive. So credit to Chovy, credit to Canyon, credit to Keen. They were the carries here, but everybody on Gen.G played well. This felt a lot more like a traditional Gen.G series than anything we had seen in the last, you know, week or so. And then for HLE on the other side, like I said, it's rant time. Yes, did this team kind of play poorly in this series? Doran played bad. He's going to get done of the series, and, you know, Zeka made some mistakes. Chovy was definitely better, even though he did also gain a lot for his team throughout this series. But again, it's just this constant conversation where it's like, Viper's in elo hell, Viper's way too good for this team. I don't get it. I don't understand it. It is just not something that computes in my brain. I understand that Viper's one of the best AD carries in the world, but if you're saying that Viper's an elo hell, that means he needs to be on a team that is better than Hanwha Life. Okay, so tell me the team that he should be on where he can replace the AD carry that's on that team and it will 100%, without any doubt, be an upgrade. Is he an upgrade on Gen.G? Is he 100% better than Paze? He certainly wasn't last year, and Paze has more upside. I wouldn't take Viper over Paze at the current moment in terms of roster building. Okay, is he better than Gumayushi? Maybe, but like, Guma's perfect for what T1 wants to do. He's the best weak side AD carry in the entire world. He is the exact fit for that team. Okay, not T1. Okay, well, that's all the teams that are definitely better than HLE and the LCK. Let's move over to the LPL. Let's say you might want to go back to the LPL. Okay, Billy Gaming, maybe the best team in the world. Is Viper definitely better than Elk? Right now, I can't tell you that. Elk wins more games for his team than Viper does, even if Viper is more talented than Elk is, because their mentalities are very different, or at least they have been ever since Viper rejoined the LCK. Okay, JD Gaming, is he better than Ruler? No. Okay, Top Esports, is he better than Jackie Love? No. Okay, that's all the teams that I can guarantee you are better than Hanwha Life Esports. I don't get this idea that there is just that he's an elo hell because there's got to be a spot on a team above him where he deserves to fit in. Like, there's a lot of good AD carries in the world, and Viper is on one of the best teams in the world. And this is a classic series of why I think Viper is, in my opinion, a little bit overhyped in his current state. I loved him on EDG. I was hyping him up as the #1 ADC in the world on EDG, maybe next to Ruler, 1A, 1B, before he came back over here to the LCK. But he's kind of inherited that LCK style ever since joining Hanwha Life, where it's like, yes, he dominates and he isolates himself in these 2v2s and he's able to generate these big leads. But you know what he doesn't do from there? Carry games. Like, he doesn't win in the late game. It's just not something he's been able to do. Do I think he can do it? Absolutely, but it's weird. This team doesn't actually play through him nearly as much as you would think they would. And honestly, there are a lot of other players on this team that gain advantages that I think would be helped if Viper was willing to be a bit more aggressive alongside them. It just feels like a clash of styles more than anything. I don't want to sit here and complain about Viper because he still was pretty good. Him and Delight were solid, and they've been really good at the start of this split, but this conversation that Viper is, without a doubt, the #1 AD carry in the world, I think stems from 2021, maybe 2022, and ever since then, it's like people are just going off of name value alone. He has not been that guy in the last year and a half. He just really hasn't. He's been very good, top 5 in the world, but Hanwha Life is arguably a top 5 team in the world, and so I don't get this elo hell conversation. That being said, Doran was awful. Like, Doran completely shit the bed. He always loses against Keen. It's actually hilarious how accurate that triangle ends up being, that rock, paper, scissors kind of circle is in the top lane for the 3 best top laners in the LCK, but Doran lived up to that here by getting dominated. Peanut tried his best in terms of the back half to control the tempo, but he just couldn't do it. Really wasn't particularly active in this game. Zeka's gonna get a lot of flame because he's a player that just generally receives a lot of flame, basically no matter how he plays in this team's losses, but he was pretty good for a lot of this series. I think mechanically he overstepped his bounds on multiple different occasions, was getting caught out, gave gold over to Gen.G when it wasn't necessarily the best thing to do. He certainly didn't play perfect, but he's also going to receive a lot more vitriol and has been receiving a lot more vitriol than he ever has earned on the Rift because it's Zeka, and that's just what people want to do. I don't really know, and this is also a separate conversation, I guess. Do you guys think that Zeka gets more hate because people like Viper and they want to say Viper's the best ADC in the world, and so Hanwha's not the best team in the world, that means it's Zeka's fault? Or do you think it's something that Zeka did on DRX, this like, or maybe even on Billy back in the day, like this idea that generated on him before he really broke out as a more consistent mid laner? I'd love to know your thoughts on why the conversation seems to be centered around Viper, Delight, best bot lane, Zeka, worst of the top tier mid laners, and that's the reason Hanwha Life sucks. I'd love to know where that conversation kind of started, but, you know, I think Zeka was better in this series than people give him credit for, and I think people are, I'm 47 minutes into this video. I can be a bit more explicit. I wonder why people hate Zeka and dick ride for Viper so much, I guess. I think Viper is a little bit worse than people say he is. He's not this guaranteed #1 AD carry, and I think Zeka is certainly better than people say he is. It's a weird conversation around HLE, but I'd love to know your guys' thoughts on it down in the comments, whether I'm crazy, whether you just think that I'm too passionate about this and that it's not, you know, accurate of me to be saying it, and, you know, maybe I'm just pushing back on narratives that don't need to be pushed back on. I'd just love to know your thoughts below, but yeah, that's my thoughts on HLE. For Gen.G, they're great. Like, they're a really good team. I'm not going to worry about the loss to KT too much. I didn't expect this team to go undefeated. They're very volatile in a couple of areas. Keen and Canyon, in particular, can just have bad series every once in a while. Lehens is certainly not prone to being perfect all the time, and Paze is still very young. Like, this isn't one of those teams that I would expect to just dominate and go undefeated all year long. That loss to KT was fine, but you got to be able to bounce back from it, and that's exactly what they did in this series. And then moving on to our second series of day number 4, and you guys are lucky. You're in for a treat today. You're not just getting one rant about Reddit, you're getting the double fixin' on day number 4 here. Let's talk about Dplus KIA taking on DRX. Not a particularly insightful series. DK is able to take care of DRX. They've had a ridiculously rough start to the year in terms of their schedule. I mean, they're 2-5, but all 5 of those losses are to top 5 teams in the league, and so, you know, they're gonna go on hopefully a winning streak now that they actually get to play some lower tier teams, basically the opposite of FearX up until this point in terms of their schedule strength. But man, I don't want to have to do this every single week, but I have to put this disclaimer out there, and I don't want to go as in-depth to this as I did the Zeka Viper one, because really, I don't want to do these rants. I really don't want to have these conversations, but first of all, I tweeted out something on Twitter. Go follow me on Twitter if you don't follow me on Twitter. I post more unhinged thoughts there. I just go into detail on them on this channel, but I posted LCK fans try not to treat players like, or try to actually treat players like they're playing now instead of what their names were 5 years ago challenge impossible. And then said, yes, this is about Rascal and Teddy. Whereas, like, I get it, man. Teddy used to be really good, and Rascal used to be really good, but I don't understand. I do not understand how you can watch this team play, how you can genuinely watch DRX on the map and be like, yeah, Rascal and Teddy should be on upper tier teams. Rascal has been a bottom 3 to 5 player in the LCK, not a top laner in the LCK, every position. He has been miserable. You could make an argument he's been the worst player on this team. I think Sponge might take that for sure. Satab is certainly in the conversation, but Rascal, throughout the beginning of this split, has been awful. He was awful last year too, and Teddy is the same player every single year. I know I went into this already last week, but I'm gonna go into it very quickly again here. Teddy is a very mechanically talented player who does not have the mentality to ever be like the best player on a team. He just never will be. He is really good if you surround him with good players. If you put him on a team with other talented players, he does all of the fundamentals of League at a very high level. He can lane well, he can team fight well, but he is about the most passive AD carry in the entire world. So when you put him on Caitlyn, when you put him on Ezreal, and you ask him to go win you games, he's not going to do that. He's never been that guy. It's why he's constantly on teams that underperform. It's because he is not the kind of player you can put resources into that is going to pay you out tenfold. He is like a worse version of Deft. Like, that is the best way I can put it, is this idea of Deft where he needs to kind of be that secondary piece on a team where you're really not going to win worlds if Deft is your number 1 carry, but as your number 2, you're going to win worlds and it's going to be really easy. Like, that idea for Teddy, he's like a worse version of that, where he can perform in really good environments, but he's going to look like shit if you surround him with bad players. He's not going to make a bad team better, and he's certainly not an elite AD carry, and I'm constantly hearing that he's elo held. In my opinion, I don't think Rascal and Teddy should be starting in the LCK right now. I really don't think they've earned those jobs. I don't think they've played particularly well, and yet at the beginning of every single DRX comment section, you're gonna see, man, Teddy's an elo hell. Oh, Rascal's an elo hell. I just can't imagine that anyone is watching these games and saying that, specifically Rascal. Like, for Teddy, I get it, because he doesn't really make, like, ridiculous mistakes. He's not stepping up and dying for no reason. He's not putting himself too far out there. He's just so ineffective at actually being able to do anything in the game. He's the example I give to people where I'm like, league stats are great, but they're certainly not the end of the story, because Teddy's stats look great, and then you watch him play and you're like, you gotta go do something, man. Like, you gotta move around the map. You gotta start, like, forcing fights. When you're 1K, 1.5K gold over your AD carry opponent, you gotta force fights, or you're just gonna get outscaled and you're gonna lose, and that's the problem with Teddy, is he just doesn't do that. I think Pliata's, you know, the opposite. Pliata's a very good player. He pulled out Varus support, Ashe support here, and I'm all in on Pliata. I think a big part of why this 2v2 has worked so much isolated is because Pliata is so good in lane, but man, I'm just out on Teddy. Obviously, jungle mid doesn't help, them being awful. Like, Satab is going to get dead of the series here. 0-11-5 on Taliyah and TF. That TF game in particular in game 2, miserable, and Sponge has just not been able to keep up with any jungler that he's played against. He might be the worst jungler in the LCK right now, and that's certainly saying something with some of the bottom teams, but I do think a lot of the conversation surrounding this team, again, has been about Rascal and Teddy, and I just don't agree with that. I think the best thing this team could do is potentially put Paddock back in the bot lane. At least he's going to go out there and try to make plays. He might not be as talented as Teddy is, but the mentality I think fits this team a little bit better for the direction they might want to go in. And I really don't see why you're playing Rascal. Like, if he's going to be a bottom 1, bottom 2 top laner in the LCK, get a young player in there. Like, you're not winning. There really is no upside. So to me, I would just get them off the team or invest somewhere else. Like, go get Tarzan and really try. I don't really know what the solution is right now, but this version of DRX feels like you're caught in between two bad things where you've got veterans that aren't improving and also the team is garbage. So, but outside of DRX, you've got DK on the other side. Hey, they won a series. Let's go. It's been a little while since they did that. They've been on a bit of a losing streak, but they played really well here. Player of the series is going to go to Kellen. That Bard was awesome in game number 2. That's the playmaking style that I like from Kellen. Now, typically, he's a little bit more reserved. He's a little bit more stable in terms of what he offers, but at the end of 2022, I was calling Kellen one of the top 3 to 5 supports in the world. Now, 2023 was a bit worse from him. Certainly wasn't up to his standards, and it hasn't been a great start to 2024, but I still think he's got that in him. Him and aiming haven't exactly kind of worked in the way that you might have wanted them to, and I think you're kind of hoping that they can get back on the same page with this easier stretch of games that is coming up for them, but Kellen was great here. Lucid also was a lot better. Now, playing into Sponge is certainly going to do that. I want to see him do it against a jungler that's actually been productive at this level, but Lucid's Rel was very active on the map, was very successful. Showmaker on the Karma was good. Aiming looked good. Kingin looked good. Everybody looked good for DK. Everybody kind of did their jobs in this series, and that's all you can really ask. Like I said, for DRX, really all you want to see from them is growth from the young players. I don't think Rascal and Teddy are ever going to be good enough to like reassert their spots on, you know, teams that want to be top 5, top 6 in the league. I just don't think they have proven to be those kinds of players recently, and you know, that's just kind of the truth. But you know, if Sponge and Satab aren't going to be that either, then maybe you just have to subject yourself to being a bad team for 2024. And then for DK, like I said, this is an okay team. I still think they're top 6. I think they're clearly better than the bottom 4, but you know, I'm going to need to see more before I believe they're actually going to be a threat to even try and make Worlds. This doesn't feel like a team that is on the same level or anywhere close to the top 4 teams in the LCK right now, and I know that was the expectation for them. But nonetheless, dominating series, exactly what they needed to get their mental back, and I think that's at the very least a good thing to say. And that's going to bring us to our 5th and final day of LCK action here in week number 4. And I've been very excited to talk about this series. Let's just say that. It's FearX taking on T1. And T1, of course, does pick up the 2-0. Nothing particularly surprising or noteworthy in that result. However, Carrie is going to get player of the series. A little bit of a spoiler for, you know, the order in which we typically do things on this channel. But yeah, you're seeing that right. That's Ezreal support. That is full AD Ezreal support. And it's Nico support, which is less weird, but also still amazing. But yeah, that's Ezreal support in game number 1. And you're damn right they won. And you're damn right he was effective in game number 1. He's really not getting player of the series for game number 1. It was fine. The Ezreal was cool. It's a very funny gimmick. We've seen Rammus and Ezreal support in the same week here in the LCK. Pretty ridiculous, but he's really getting player of the series here for game number 2. This was domination coming in from T1. Nobody really expected Fox to be able to keep up with them. I don't think anybody was really anticipating them to be on the same level as T1 in this series. However, there were some good things. As much as we can sit here and say, it was a 2-0, both games were just about 30 minutes, neither really being like all that out of the ordinary for T1. Game 2 was a little bit closer than maybe you would think it would be. I mean, it was pretty much kind of the T1 classic of game is kind of close, and then one team fight happens that T1 absolutely stomps, and they're just able to end the game immediately off of it, which, like I said, is the T1 special, so credit to them. But player of the game, player of the series, it's Keria. That Nico game, he popped off. I mean, the damage charts really just show how impactful he was. It's not always, you know, 1-to-1 in terms of this guy did a lot of damage. That means he's very important. But yeah, when you're the support Nico and you're doing the most damage in the game, that's kind of a big deal, and he really was taking over a lot of these fights. This champion is ridiculously strong and very difficult to deal with. You know, we've seen a lot of the Nocturne Nico, we've seen a lot of the Nocturne Orianna. Why not do all 3 in the same comp? It's a very funny kind of turn of events, a very funny draft that T1 went for here, but Keria is good enough to be able to pull it off. I think Nico is ridiculously broken as a champion, not even because her numbers are strong, but just because of the impact that is, you know, able to be had from her ultimate. It is so simple to execute. You're basically guaranteed to get at the minimum 2 to 3 people every single team fight in that ultimate, and as long as you have good follow-up, as long as your team has good communication, it's very difficult to screw up a Nico engage, and we saw that here for T1, so Credit to the team, they were great, but again, Ezreal support is really going to be the big takeaway in terms of headlines about this series, but credit to Zeus, he continues to dominate everybody he goes up against. His Aatrox is ridiculous. We know it's ridiculous. It was ridiculous last year. It's been ridiculous for many years. He even lost to Aatrox because he loves that champion so much in the 2022 World Finals. It's always just kind of been connected to him as a player, and he continues to pilot it very highly. I think if KIA hadn't dominated so much on the Nico in Game 2, this would have been a very easy Zeus player of the series, but alas, too many good players on T1. How will they deal with it? Faker continues to be great. Owner was really good in this series. I really liked the Rel in game number 1. Really was able to establish a lot of pressure quickly, but credit to Willer. He played game 2 at a super high level. Owner wasn't able to generate as much on the Nocturne, kind of gave over a bit of the early pressure, was able to do well in the late game, but a lot of game 2 is about Zeus and KIA. So big ups to T1. They continue to look great, even basically no matter what they draft. And then for Fox on the other side, they're fine. Again, you know, there's not much that's going to change my mind about Fox. They have the same record as DK. I think they're probably closer to that than maybe they would think they would be, but clearly outside of the top 6 in their current state. Dud of the series is going to go to Henna. He's not very good, and he continues to not be very good. He's just a lower tier AD carry at the LCK level. Maybe he's a bit better than, you know, like Envy or like some of the other bottom tier AD carries at this level. You know, maybe better than like Taiyun, right? But not by a lot. He's just not very good. You let him play Kalista into Varus. He's never able to establish any pressure in lane because he just plays a little bit too passive, and he's really not all that mechanically talented to be able to keep up with players like Gumayushi and KIA. So, you know, unfortunately, he just had a bad series. Execute continues to not look as good as you would want him to on this FearX team. Again, maybe it's because he's playing with a worse AD carry than he did in the LEC, but he has been a little bit disappointing. I think if there is a positive to take away from this series, it's how good Willer played in game number 2 on the Lee Sin. Willer's awesome, and he's continuously been, you know, good for this Fox team. With all this talk and all these, you know, conversations that obviously I've talked about in this video about Elo Hell, whether that's for Viper, whether that's for Rascal and Teddy, you know, whoever, right? Willer's the player that's actually an Elo Hell, in my opinion. Willer's very good, and I think could actually start for teams that are above him in the standings and be in a relatively decent position. I mean, this guy at any time could be a top, you know, 10-ish jungler in the world. I think that's a pretty realistic expectation for him. Unfortunately, the team around him just isn't there. Closer was bad in this series because he beats the bad mid laners and loses to the good ones, and Clear is just not very good in the top lane, and he had to play against Zeus playing Aatrox. It was never going to go well for him, but Willer looked awesome, and he continues to look good, maybe a bit more sporadically than you would like out of a star. But, you know, Fox is fine. Again, they feel better than the bottom 3. The bottom 3 teams of Nongshim, Bro, and DRX are just a disaster. Fox is not a disaster. They're just not very good. They're just a mediocre team, and that sits them in the middle. But T1 is very good. Again, Gen.G stumbling a bit this week. That gives an opportunity for them to potentially reassert themselves as the number 1 team in the LCK. I don't think they've done that quite yet. I don't want to give up on Gen.G after they were able to beat T1, but this team is in prime position to just be able to avenge that loss later in the regular season and take back that number 1 spot. And that's going to bring us to our final series of the week here, our second series of day number 5, and a battle of bottom teams as we saw Nongshim RedForce taking on OK BRION. And Nongshim is going to pick up the 2-0 win. This is the Nongshim I was excited about after their first series that really didn't kind of come out in any form over the last couple of weeks. We did see this team play a lot tougher teams, quite frankly, but Bro is not one of those tough teams. They're not only at 0-8, they're at 1-16 in terms of game score. They have lost 16 of their 17 games in the LCK. It's maybe one of the worst starts ever. I mean, statistically speaking, it has to at least be in the conversation, and it's entirely their fault. The players were not good enough, and, you know, I've seen some conversations surrounding Bro about, like, oh, you can't really blame the players. You can kind of blame some of the players because, you know, I don't really think it's their fault, but they're not good enough to be in the LCK, and then really you should be blaming Bro management because they're the people that are continuously building this team and building subpar rosters that just aren't good enough to be able to compete, and they've gotten consistently worse as a team that was never a playoff team, which is never a good thing to say. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Let's start with Nongshim. Player of the series for me is going to go to Sylvie in the jungle. He's actually been quietly a lot better this year than he was last year. He was really bad, pretty big detriment last year. Jungle mid was generally just such a weakness for Nongshim in 2023, and top lane was as well, but jungle mid in particular really stood out, whether it was Sylvie and Fiesta or Sylvie and Quad or whoever was playing for the team, it just was not working out for them. But Sylvie in particular has been playing a lot better. The solo lanes certainly have not improved all that much. You know, they were good in this series against Bro, but, you know, generally they haven't been great. But Sylvie's actually been pretty solid. Certainly not the worst jungler in the league that he was last year. And then Jiwoo and Peter have also been really solid, but they were kind of more background players in this series. The top side of the map actually got to shine for Nongshim, and this has happened in both of their wins. Din Din has looked really good when this team wins, and it's the K'Sante, it's the Jax, it's being able to go up against a team that doesn't really know how to deal with these picks in the back half of games, that isn't super cohesive, that doesn't know how to team fight. That's when Din Din is actually able to go out there and succeed and dominate and look good. And that's what he did here. He was better than Morgan by a lot. We will get to Morgan. It really does feel like he is completely mentally checked out at this point. But Sylvie was very good. Din Din was very good. They were the stars here. Call Me had his best series of the year so far. I mean, truly, that series against FearX was good, but this was the one where he really stood out. Really liked how he was able to play both on the Hui and on the Talia. He finally was able to go up against a mid laner that he is just generally better than. That's how bad Karis is at this level. And, you know, he was able to dominate him. Like I said, Jiwoo and Peter looked good. Everybody kind of looked good for Nongshim in this series. But again, specifically the top side, Din Din and Sylvie were the standouts. If they can stay on the same page, if you can get some confidence built somehow out of these couple of players, then I think you can do something. I don't hate jungle and bot lane for Nongshim. The solo lanes just have to be able to survive to be as good as a team like, I don't know, Fox in the standings. I don't really think it's that out of the realm of possibility. In this series, I think went and showed that they are definitely better than the bottom two. But for Bro, I mean, truly, like, what else is there to say? This organization is inept. They continuously bring in player after player that you know is not going to be successful here. They've made the team worse year after year, and even adding on top of that, the coaching staff doesn't exactly fix any of the issues that these players have. It's not like, I mean, there are organizations where you bring in some more project-oriented players, players that maybe aren't perfect, maybe don't have the same skill ceiling as others, and you know they're going to be able to get more out of them than maybe your average, you know, team would. We saw that for years with Sandbox. Not that they're, you know, FearX is doing that this year or anything like that, but we saw that for years with certain organizations in the LCK, where basically no matter who you brought in, you could get the most out of them, even if that wasn't perfect. Bro is the opposite. It feels like they bring in bad players and they make them play even worse on their team. We've seen it countless times. Really, the only player who's bucked that trend has been Morgan. I mean, Gideon started this year okay, but he has been really bad in the last couple of weeks, ever since getting subbed out for Void for no reason, which again, just completely upset his momentum when he was the only player on the team playing well. Morgan is now starting to play bad because you can see he is entirely mentally checked out. He's going to get done of the series here. When he teleported in game number 2 just to instantly die, like, what do you want me to say about that? Like, that's somebody who is like protesting being on the Rift, and that's never a good sign. Karis is one of the worst LCK mid laners I've ever watched. I mean, truly, we are 3 years into this experiment, and he has failed at basically every single stop. I don't really know what else to tell you. He's not even good enough to go head-to-head with Call Me, who has been running it in the LCK recently. As much as I like Samver, he can't do anything here. Polu is certainly not a game changer. Bro is just not good. This organization has no idea how to identify and spot talent. They have no idea how to make their team relevant. This coaching staff has no idea how to get the best out of their players, and unfortunately, that means that the product and the team that they're putting on the Rift is the worst that it's ever been for Bro. We started with this really interesting team with players like Lava and players like Delight that, while maybe Lava isn't a star, he was pretty good for Bro, and obviously a lot of people like, even though I'm way lower on him than your average person, but like Delight's turned into a star, and like there are people out there, players on this team that were interesting, and they've gotten rid of all of them in order to build what can only be described as a lifeless roster. This is not a good team, this is not a good org, and they failed on every front. Bro is the laughingstock of the LCK right now, and it's deserved. I mean, this organization deserves it for how they've handled everything. But for Nongshim on the other side, like, I mean, they're fine. Like, again, maybe they're top 7. Like, at absolute best, maybe you could consider them, you know, growing as a team, especially if they can figure out some of their issues. But they got destroyed by Fox for a reason. This is not a particularly good team either. They're still in the bottom 2. Beating Bro doesn't change my opinion on them at all. But it still is nice to see it's shown that they are not a bottom 2 team. They're just a bottom 4 team, which I think is definitely a better place to be. And there's definitely upside here with Jiwoo being strong and Sylvie and Peter showing growth. As long as Din Din and Call Me can be relatively fine, maybe Nongshim can make some other series interesting. All right, but that is going to do it for my LCK Week 4 Spring Split overview and analysis video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Of course, up on the screen now, the updated standings after 4 weeks of action here in the LCK. No more ties, so we don't have to worry about any tie breakers, but of course, what you're seeing on the screen in the first column to the right is my power rankings. That's where I personally power rank these teams from number 1 to number 10. In the second column, how those have changed from last week to this week. We can go over the risers and the fallers, but shocker, there's really not a lot of risers and fallers. Basically, everybody living up to expectations this week. The only change I'm making is moving KT Rolster up to number 3 in my power rankings, which means Hanwha Life moves down to number 4. This has more to do with me believing more in KT and less to do with me not believing in Hanwha. I think Hanwha is as good as I thought they were, but instead of this being kind of a big 3, in my opinion, in the LCK, it is very much turned into a big 4, and KT deserves to be recognized for that. Their win over Gen.G definitely solidified in my mind that they are up, at least in the upper echelons right now, even if I don't expect that to happen in, perpetuity. I don't expect KT to be able to always beat Gen.G. You still got to recognize that this is clearly a team that deserves to be in the upper echelon. I'm keeping Gen.G at number 1 because I do think that until they lose consistently and really start to look like a team that isn't, the most dominant in the LCK, then I'm not going to be concerned. They looked great down the stretch, even though it was an easier series in the second half. T1's still looking good. They're obviously on that win streak ever since losing, but for now, they stay at number 2. And then HLE, like I said, I really don't feel worse about them. I feel basically the same. This is a team that is worse than the top 2 teams for sure, and you can make an argument it's definitely, top 4, maybe even top 3, right? Maybe you don't make any changes at all to my power rankings, but I just trust KT a bit more. And then for KDF, they're going to stay at 5. Clearly, DK is going to stay at 6. The bottom 4 feel very clear, and DK, even though they're not playing well, definitely feel better than them. Fox is the best of the rest. Nongshim definitely better than the bottom 2. And then the bottom 2 being what they are. DRX beat Bro. Bro sucks. They're number 10. Do you guys disagree with anything? Maybe we're not the same number 1 to 10, even though the LCK does feel pretty stock standard right now. I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on the power rankings and on everything down below. But of course, it's time to move into my player of the week and my dud of the week for week 4 here. And this is a fun conversation to have. Player of the week for me in week number 4, it's going to go to KIA, the support for T1. Awesome week for him. Not only was he pulling out crazy picks like the Ezreal, but he was dominating in games on the Nico, on, other AD carries like Ashe. He was kind of just dominating in a lot of different areas. He was a very strong, very effective player this week. This felt like classic KIA, the dominating best support of all time that we kind of know. And, whether or not you believe that he's the best support of all time, he's at the very least in the conversation. And that's kind of the version of him that we got here in week 4. I think in terms of teammates that could have been nominated, Zeus was awesome this week. Faker had a good week, but to me, KIA was clearly the star for T1. And then my runners up, first one's going to go to Dudu. He was the other player that I was seriously considering for this. He was awesome for KDF this week. It really feels like he's starting to get his groove back. The spark for KDF absolutely feels like it's there now, and it's very much clear on the top side of the map. Whether it's Dudu, whether it's Cuz, whether it's Bulldog, the introduction of a new bot lane, I think, has really helped this team, re-find its identity, and it's really working for them. And then the other runner-up's going to be Pioshik, who just continues to be in this slot, basically every other week. He is playing really well. Like I said, kind of on MVP pace right now, and he was great for KT, who looked really strong in their wins this week. But those are my 3 player of the week nominees, but KIA is going to get it. And then dud of the week for me, unfortunately, is going to go to Clear, the top laner for Fox. I considered a couple of people. Basically, anybody on Bro could have won this, specifically Morgan, who did not have a good week. Polu did not have a good week for Bro, and that was definitely something I took into account. DRX looked awful if you wanted to give it to Rascal or if you wanted to give it to Satab. I think that's relatively fair, but I'm going to give it to Clear. He felt like the most consistently bad across all of the games that he played. Fox's schedule is getting a lot harder, but I think what has become clear is that Clear is not good enough to play in the LCK at the current moment. A very hyped prospect from a long time ago. In DRX's system, it's just not worked out for him. He has been mediocre at best at this level, and right now he is kind of getting taken advantage of. He is clearly one of the worst top laners in the league, and that was made apparent this week. But let me know if you agree or disagree with my player of the week and dud of the week choices down in the comment section below. And that's going to do it for today's video. If you enjoyed, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We don't only post about the LCK on this channel. We post about all 4 of the major regions: LCS, LEC, LCK, LPL. Every single week. LEC starting up back again soon. LCS has some time off, but the LPL is going to be coming back around this upcoming week. There's a lot of content rolling out on this channel, and so if you're interested in a comprehensive overview of basically everything going on in LoL Esports, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But of course, With all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.